For 847 days, the guards thought he was just another broken American pilot. They saw him shuffle to work detail, head down, spirit crushed. What they didn't see was the elaborate escape plan he was scratching into the walls, one grain of concrete at a time. On day 848, 47 American prisoners would walk out of that camp alive. Welcome to True Story Zone. Before we dive into this incredible story of courage, brotherhood, and the unbreakable American spirit, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this honor our heroes, hit that subscribe button. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan's F-18 Super Hornet was hit by a surface-to-air missile at 15,000 feet over enemy territory on March 15, 2003. The explosion tore through his aircraft's left wing, sending the fighter into an uncontrollable spin toward the mountainous terrain below. Jake had less than 30 seconds to make the decision that would define the next 3 years of his life. Eject over enemy territory and face certain capture, or attempt a crash landing that would likely kill him, but prevent the enemy from taking an American prisoner. His training at the Navy Fighter Weapons School, Top Gun, had prepared him for combat scenarios, but not for this choice. As warning alarms screamed in his cockpit and his aircraft plummeted toward Earth, Jake made the decision that every military pilot hopes they'll never have to make. He pulled the ejection handle. The explosive charges fired his seat clear of the disintegrating aircraft, and Jake found himself falling through hostile airspace under a parachute that made him visible for miles. Below, he could see enemy forces already moving toward his projected landing site. Jake touched down hard in a rocky valley 15 miles behind enemy lines. His left ankle twisted on impact, and he felt the sharp pain of torn ligaments. But adrenaline and survival training took over immediately. He gathered his parachute, activated his emergency beacon, and began moving toward the extraction coordinates he'd memorized before the mission. For 6 hours, Jake evaded capture. He used every technique the Navy's SEER program, survival, evasion, resistance, escape, had taught him. He moved through ravines to avoid sight lines, used rocks and vegetation for cover, and maintained strict noise discipline as enemy patrols searched the area. But the terrain worked against him. The Rocky Mountains provided few hiding places, and his injured ankle slowed his movement to a painful crawl. At 1400 hours, 6 hours after ejection, Jake was surrounded by 12 enemy soldiers who had been tracking him methodically through the valley. The moment of capture was swift and brutal. Jake was blindfolded, bound, and loaded into a truck for transport to what he would later learn was Prison Camp 19, a facility that held 46 other American prisoners of war. The last thing Jake remembered thinking as the truck pulled away was a promise he made to himself. Somehow, some way, he would find a way home. Not just for himself, but for every American being held in that camp. Prison Camp 19 was designed to break the human spirit. Located in a remote mountain valley, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, the facility held 47 American prisoners in conditions that violated every international law governing the treatment of POWs. Each prisoner was housed in a concrete cell measuring 6 feet by 8 feet, with a small window near the ceiling that provided minimal light and no view of the outside world. The cells were cold in winter, stifling in summer, and always damp from poor ventilation and mountain humidity. Jake's cell was number 23, located in the middle of a cell block that housed 12 prisoners. The walls were thick concrete, the door was heavy steel with a small slot for food delivery, and the floor was bare stone that conducted cold directly into his body during the freezing mountain nights. The daily routine was designed to crush hope and resistance. Prisoners were awakened at 0500 with harsh lights and shouting guards. They were given 15 minutes to use primitive sanitation facilities, then marched to a mess hall where they received one meal consisting of thin rice gruel and whatever scraps the guards decided to provide. After the morning meal, prisoners were assigned to work details that served no purpose other than psychological torture. They moved rocks from one pile to another, dug holes that were immediately filled in, or performed repetitive tasks that accomplished nothing but exhaustion and despair. The guards rotated regularly, but their methods remained consistent: constant surveillance, unpredictable punishment, and deliberate humiliation designed to convince prisoners that resistance was futile and escape was impossible. But what the guards didn't understand was that they had captured a United States Navy officer who had spent 8 years in military service developing the mental toughness, strategic thinking, and leadership skills that would transform their prison camp into something they never expected. Jake's first months in captivity were the hardest. The physical pain from his injured ankle, combined with poor nutrition and harsh living conditions, pushed his body to its limits. The psychological pressure was even worse. Isolation, uncertainty about rescue, and the constant presence of guards who seemed to enjoy prisoner suffering. But Jake's military training provided a foundation that the enemy couldn't break. During his years as a naval aviator, he had learned to compartmentalize stress, maintain focus under pressure, and think strategically even in the worst circumstances. More importantly, Jake understood that he was not just a prisoner. He was still a United States military officer with responsibilities to his fellow Americans and his country. During work details, Jake began making contact with other prisoners. Communication was dangerous as guards punished any interaction between captives. But Jake developed subtle methods of exchanging information. A hand gesture during meals, a cough pattern that conveyed meaning, eye contact that lasted just long enough to share a message. Within 3 months, Jake had established communication with 12 other prisoners in his cell block. He learned their names, their capture dates, their physical condition, and most importantly, their mental state. Some had been held for over 2 years and showed signs of severe psychological breakdown. Others, more recently captured, still retained hope and fighting spirit. Jake realized that any escape plan would need to address not just the physical challenges of breaking out of prison, but the psychological challenge of convincing 46 other men that freedom was possible after months or years of captivity. He also began studying the prison's security systems. With the systematic approach of a military intelligence analyst, during work details, he observed guard patterns, shift changes, and security procedures. He counted personnel, identified weaknesses, and mentally cataloged every detail that might be useful in an escape attempt. But Jake's most important discovery came during his 4th month of captivity, when he realized that the concrete walls of his cell could be carved with patience, determination, and the right tools. The idea came to Jake during a work detail in the prison's maintenance area. While moving supplies under guard supervision, he noticed a small piece of metal, probably a broken screw or bolt, lying in the corner of the storage room. When the guard's attention was elsewhere, Jake palmed the metal fragment and slipped it into his pocket. That night, in the darkness of his cell, Jake began experimenting with the metal piece. The concrete walls were old and porous, and with enough pressure and patience, the metal could scratch away tiny fragments of concrete. It was slow, quiet, and almost invisible to casual observation. Jake started with a small mark near the floor in the corner of his cell, where shadows and poor lighting would hide his work. Each night, after the guards completed their evening inspection, he would scratch away at the concrete wall, grain by grain, hiding the debris in his thin mattress and disposing of it during work details. But Jake wasn't just digging randomly. He was creating a communication system. Over the course of 6 months, Jake carved a series of small holes through the concrete wall that separated his cell from the adjacent cell occupied by Captain Mike Chen, an Army officer who had been captured during a patrol 8 months earlier. The holes were tiny, no larger than a pencil lead, but they allowed the 2 officers to whisper to each other during the night hours when guards were less attentive. Through these conversations, Jake learned about the prison's layout, the other prisoners' conditions, and most importantly, he found an ally who shared his determination to escape. Captain Chen had been planning his own escape attempt, but lacked the strategic thinking and organizational skills that Jake brought to the effort. Together, they began developing a comprehensive plan that would require months of preparation and the coordination of all 47 American prisoners. The plan was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted in military history. A simultaneous escape of every American prisoner in the camp, executed with military precision and coordinated timing that would overwhelm the guards and provide the best chance of survival for everyone involved. Creating a communication network among 47 prisoners scattered across multiple cell blocks required patience, ingenuity, and careful risk management. Jake and Captain Chen spent months developing a system that could pass information throughout the camp without detection by guards. The foundation of their network was the work details. Every day, prisoners were assigned to different tasks around the camp: kitchen duty, maintenance work, garbage collection, and manual labor. These assignments rotated, giving Jake opportunities to make brief contact with prisoners from other cell blocks. Jake developed a series of hand signals and coded phrases that could convey complex information in seconds. A specific way of holding his work tool indicated message for you. A particular cough pattern meant meet tonight. Eye contact combined with subtle gestures could communicate coordinates, timing, and instructions. But the most crucial element of the network was identifying natural leaders among the prisoner population. Jake needed officers and senior NCOs who could organize groups of prisoners, maintain discipline, and execute complex instructions under extreme pressure. He identified Master Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, an Army Ranger who had been captured during a reconnaissance mission. Rodriguez controlled communication with 8 prisoners in the North Cell Block and had maintained his military bearing despite 18 months of captivity. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, an Air Force intelligence officer, had established authority among 12 prisoners in the women's section of the camp. Her analytical skills and attention to detail made her invaluable for identifying security weaknesses and timing guard patterns. Chief Petty Officer Dave Wilson, a Navy SEAL, was the physical security expert who could assess escape routes, disable security systems, and handle any violent resistance they might encounter. Together, these 5 senior prisoners formed a command structure that could coordinate the most complex escape attempt in POW history. For Jake's plan to succeed, they needed detailed intelligence about every aspect of the prison's security. This meant months of careful observation, systematic data collection, and risk-taking that could result in severe punishment if discovered. Each prisoner in the network was assigned specific intelligence tasks based on their work assignments and access to different areas of the camp. Kitchen workers mapped the facility's layout and identified all exits. Maintenance crews studied electrical systems and communication equipment. Garbage collectors observed guard schedules and patrol patterns. Jake himself focused on the most critical element, the guards' response procedures for emergencies. During his year in captivity, he had witnessed several incidents that revealed how prison security reacted to problems. A prisoner medical emergency, a kitchen fire, and a fight between inmates had all provided insights into guard protocols, response times, and weaknesses in their security procedures. The most valuable intelligence came from Master Sergeant Rodriguez, whose work detail included maintenance of the guard towers. Over several months, Rodriguez was able to observe and map the complete security system, the locations of all cameras, the timing of guard rotations, the communication equipment used to coordinate security, and most importantly, the periods when security was reduced due to shift changes and meal breaks. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez used her intelligence training to analyze all the collected information and identify the optimal timing for an escape attempt. Her conclusion was both encouraging and terrifying. There was a 43-minute window each night when the camp security was vulnerable. But that window occurred only once every 2 weeks when multiple factors aligned. The escape would have to be planned for a specific night, executed with perfect timing, and coordinated among 47 people who had been trained to follow orders, but had never worked together as a unit. Jake knew that the physical act of escaping the prison would be only the beginning of their challenge. Once outside the camp, 47 American prisoners would need to survive in hostile territory, evade massive search efforts, and reach friendly forces more than 100 miles away. This meant that each prisoner needed to be physically and mentally prepared for what could become weeks of survival in harsh mountain terrain. Jake began implementing a training program that had to be conducted in secret while maintaining the appearance of broken, hopeless prisoners. During work details, prisoners began sharing survival knowledge. Those with military training taught others about land navigation, water procurement, food foraging, and cold weather survival. Former medics provided basic first aid instruction and identified medical supplies that could be gathered from the prison clinic. Physical conditioning was more challenging, as prisoners were deliberately kept weak through poor nutrition and exhausting work assignments. But Jake developed exercises that could be performed in the cells during night hours, isometric strength training, flexibility routines, and cardiovascular exercises that could be done silently. The most important preparation was psychological. Many prisoners had been held for over 2 years and had developed learned helplessness. The belief that escape was impossible and resistance was futile. Jake needed to rebuild their confidence, restore their fighting spirit, and convince them that freedom was achievable. He accomplished this through the communication network, sharing stories of successful military operations, reminding prisoners of their oath to support and defend the Constitution, and emphasizing that their duty as American service members did not end with capture. Jake also addressed the fear that motivated many prisoners to avoid escape attempts, the certainty of brutal punishment if they were recaptured. He acknowledged this risk honestly, while emphasizing that remaining in captivity indefinitely was not acceptable for American military personnel. After 18 months of preparation, Jake's escape plan was ready for execution. The operation would require precise timing, flawless coordination, and a level of risk that could result in death for anyone who made a mistake. The plan began with simultaneous action in all cell blocks. At exactly 0247 hours, when guard rotations created the maximum security gap, prisoners would use tools they had gathered and concealed over months to break out of their cells. Jake had carved through his cell wall to create a hole large enough for escape, while prisoners in other areas had developed different methods based on their specific security situations. Once free of their cells, each group would move to predetermined assembly points within the prison compound. Chief Petty Officer Wilson would lead a team to neutralize the main guard post and communications center, preventing alerts to outside security forces. Master Sergeant Rodriguez would secure the main gate and create an exit route for the entire group. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez would coordinate movement timing to ensure all prisoners reached the assembly point within the narrow window when guards were changing shifts. Any prisoner who failed to reach the checkpoint on time would be left behind to prevent compromise of the entire operation. The most dangerous phase would be moving 47 people across open ground between the prison buildings and the perimeter fence. This required crossing areas covered by security cameras and guard tower observation points, but Martinez had identified a route that would be invisible during the specific 43-minute window they had selected. Jake had used his pilot training and geographic knowledge to identify 3 different routes that would provide the best chance of reaching American forces while avoiding enemy patrol areas. Each team would include prisoners with different survival skills, medical training, navigation expertise, combat experience, and language abilities that might be useful for interacting with local populations. On the night of September 12th, after 847 days in captivity, Jake Sullivan initiated the most daring prison escape in American military history. At exactly 0247 hours, Jake used the metal tool he had been sharpening for months to complete the opening he had been carving in his cell wall. The hole was barely large enough for his body, but 18 months of poor nutrition had reduced his weight enough to squeeze through the opening into the adjacent maintenance corridor. Throughout the prison, 46 other Americans were executing their assigned roles with military precision. In the North Cell Block, Master Sergeant Rodriguez led 8 prisoners through a coordinated cell break that required dismantling door hinges they had been loosening for months. In the women's section, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez timed her group's movement to coincide with a planned distraction that drew guards away from their observation posts. Chief Petty Officer Wilson's team reached the guard station exactly on schedule, using techniques learned in SEAL training to neutralize two guards without raising alarms. Within minutes, they had control of the prison's communications center and prevented any alerts from reaching outside security forces. The movement across the prison compound was the most dangerous phase of the operation. 47 prisoners had to cross open ground in small groups, timing their movement to avoid security cameras and guard tower observation. Martinez had calculated routes and timing down to the second, and every prisoner reached the perimeter fence within the planned 30-minute window. Breaking through the perimeter required wire cutters that Rodriguez had improvised from materials gathered during work details. The fence was electrified, but Wilson's team had disabled the power system as part of their assault on the guard station. What should have been an impenetrable barrier became a simple obstacle that was breached in minutes. By 0330 hours, all 47 American prisoners were outside the camp and moving through the mountain terrain toward freedom. Behind them, Prison Camp 19 sat silent and empty, the guards unaware that their captives had vanished into the night. The escape from prison was only the beginning of Jake's greatest challenge. 47 American service members now faced a 100-mile journey through hostile territory, with no food, minimal clothing, and the certainty that massive search efforts would begin as soon as their escape was discovered. Jake's group consisted of 12 prisoners, including Captain Chen, and 2 enlisted men with mountain survival experience. They moved through rocky terrain that provided cover from search aircraft, but made progress slow and exhausting. For 3 days, they traveled only at night, hiding during daylight hours in caves and rock formations that offered concealment from enemy patrols. Jake used his pilot training in land navigation to maintain course toward the coordinates where friendly forces were most likely to be located. Food was the most immediate concern. The group had been able to gather some supplies from the prison kitchen, but not enough to sustain 12 people for the journey they faced. They began foraging for edible plants and setting snares for small animals, using survival techniques some had learned in military training, and others had developed during their captivity. Water was easier to find in the mountain environment, but required careful treatment to avoid illness that could slow their movement or compromise their health when they most needed physical strength. On the 4th day, they encountered their first enemy patrol. Jake's group spotted the search team from a concealed position and watched 12 enemy soldiers move through the valley below them. The patrol was systematic and thorough, checking every cave and hiding place that could conceal escaped prisoners. Jake realized that enemy forces were not just searching randomly, they were using tracking dogs and systematic search patterns that would eventually find any group moving through the area. The escaped prisoners needed to change their strategy from evasion to speed, accepting greater risk of detection in exchange for faster movement towards safety. On the 8th day after their escape, Jake's group made contact with American forces. They had covered nearly 80 miles through mountain terrain, evading multiple search patrols and surviving on minimal food and water. All 12 members of Jake's group were alive, though exhausted and suffering from exposure and malnutrition. The contact came when Jake spotted an American helicopter conducting what appeared to be a search and rescue operation in the distance. Using survival signaling techniques, he created a visible signal fire that attracted the aircraft's attention. Within 2 hours, Jake and his 11 fellow prisoners were aboard American helicopters, heading toward the safety of a forward operating base. For the first time in 855 days, Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan was free. But Jake's first concern was not his own safety. It was the fate of the other 35 prisoners who had split into different groups during the escape. Over the following week, American forces located and rescued all but 3 of the escaped prisoners. 34 more Americans were safely recovered, bringing the total successful rescues to 44 out of 47 escapees. The 3 prisoners who were not recovered had died during the journey, not from enemy action, but from medical conditions that had been worsened by their captivity. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Their deaths occurred during an escape attempt that succeeded in freeing 44 Americans who might otherwise have remained in captivity indefinitely. Jake Sullivan's escape from Prison Camp 19 became one of the most celebrated military operations in American history. The successful coordination of 47 prisoners, the months of planning and preparation, and the execution of the most complex prison break ever attempted demonstrated the unbreakable spirit of American service members. Jake was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership during captivity and his role in organizing the escape. Captain Chen, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, and Chief Petty Officer Wilson received similar decorations for their courage and dedication to their fellow prisoners. But for Jake, the greatest reward was not the medals or recognition. It was the knowledge that his decision to fight rather than accept captivity had resulted in freedom for 44 Americans who might otherwise have spent years in enemy prison camps. During his recovery and debriefing, Jake was asked by military investigators how he had maintained the mental strength to plan and execute such an ambitious escape operation after more than 2 years in captivity. His answer reflected the values that had sustained him throughout his ordeal. "I never forgot that I was still a United States Navy officer. My duty didn't end when I was captured. It just changed. Instead of flying missions, my mission became getting my fellow Americans home safely." Jake returned to active duty and continued flying for the Navy until his retirement in 2018. But he never forgot the lesson learned during his 855 days in captivity, that the strength of American service members comes not from weapons or technology, but from their commitment to each other and their unwillingness to accept defeat. Today, the story of Jake Sullivan's escape is taught at military survival schools as an example of leadership, planning, and the power of coordinated action. The techniques developed during the escape have been incorporated into military training programs, and Jake's emphasis on prisoner communication and organization has become standard doctrine for surviving captivity. More importantly, Jake's story serves as a reminder that American service members never stop fighting for freedom, regardless of the circumstances they face. His commitment to bringing home every prisoner, his months of patient planning, and his refusal to accept permanent captivity demonstrate the values that define American military service. The 44 Americans who survived the escape have all returned to productive lives, many continuing their military careers and others transitioning to civilian professions. But all of them carry with them the knowledge that their freedom came through the courage and leadership of a Navy pilot who refused to give up hope. Jake Sullivan's story proves that the most powerful weapon in the American military arsenal is not any aircraft, ship, or weapon system. It's the determination of American service members to never leave a fellow warrior behind, never accept defeat, and never stop fighting for the values they swore to defend. So I ask you, have you ever faced a situation that seemed hopeless? Have you ever been inspired by someone who refused to give up when others had lost hope? Share their story in the comments, because stories of courage and determination deserve to be remembered. If this story moved you, subscribe to True Stories Zone. We're here to honor the heroes who prove that the American spirit cannot be broken, caged, or conquered. We tell the stories of those who remind us that freedom is never free, but it's always worth fighting for. Because sometimes the greatest victories come not from the battles we fight, but from the spirit we refuse to surrender. And sometimes the most important mission is simply bringing everyone home alive. Until next time, remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It's action in spite of fear. Honor is not what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one will ever know. And freedom is not something you receive. It's something you fight for, one day at a time until you find your way home.